All right, you may begin, Alyssa. Happy Sabbath.
Thanks. Happy Sabbath, everyone. I'll make sure that everything is still in frame. Let's bow for prayer. Gracious Creator, we come before you as a people in need of your wisdom, your heart, of this understanding of patriarchy and the Apis bull. Help us to see what it is that you want us to see rather than what we think it ought to be. I pray this in your Son's name, Jesus Christ. Amen. Okay. So today I want to talk with everybody about patriarchy as a form of idol worship. Just to give everyone a little bit of fair warning, you may feel uncomfortable through this. And we might go a little bit long, depends on how much conversation we engage in. So talking with a few of my friends this week about how they have been, I guess, how the message of patriarchy, of equality, of radical feminism has impacted their lives, if at all. And there still seems to be a little bit of uncertainty, of not sure what to what to do, how to make these necessary changes in their lives, and probably my life as well. Elder Tess has said that this will be something that patriarchy and Apis bull and internalized misogyny will probably be with us until the end, at least until after the Sunday law. So if this is our testing message, we must really become very clear as to how this system, if we don't see it as something, patriarchy, if we don't see it as something that is, pertaining to an individual, pertaining to just man, to that individual person, of looking at it as a system in which we have found ourselves in, or well, us in our generation, we've found ourselves in, but throughout the beginning of, after the fall, or after sin was introduced, how the patriarchal system was established and reinforced, and what that means, what are the implications for us in the end times right now, at the end of the world. So I want to just kind of refresh our memories as to where patriarchy came from and its influences. So we oftentimes, I'm going to start at the beginning with the Eden Restored line. And we see that there are the three sins that are introduced. The first one is gender equality. The second one is worship, the Sabbath. And the third being racism, nationalism. And then how those three sins, how our response to those sins impacted our history up until now, even now. And I think I might have gotten a little ahead of myself trying to put too much on the board. So I really just want us to focus on these three, or or at least the line for right now. And an understanding, and I could have my numbers wrong. I just couldn't find where they were this morning. But I think Elder Tess has written from Eden to Moses 2,500 years. Maybe it was 28. I can't remember. I remember there being like either 1,000 years to the flood or 1,500 to the flood, and then another
25. Correct, Alyssa.
Okay, to Moses is 2,500.
And 1,500 to the flood.
Okay, thank you. So when we take a look at where the structure of the Bible, how the writings of Scripture came to be, we can see that there's 2,500 years of unwritten history until we have the written language. And then when Moses begins to write the 5 books that he did, how were they influenced? What were his influences? Because before Moses, we had not just the kingdom of Babylon around the Israelites, around the Hebrews, but the Babylonian captivity, and then a little bit of a rest from that, and then the Egypt captivity 400 years before Moses. And then we go on from there. But just looking at Babylon and Egypt's influences over the writings of the early scriptures, it doesn't take much. And maybe there's a Spirit of Prophecy quote that I am just not familiar with that may even contradict or support. If you know of either, please either correct me or let me know of, or let us know of the Spirit of Prophecy reference, so we can look at that. But if we take into account Babylonian and Egyptian influences over, coming out of Egypt, they had to reestablish, relearn the Sabbath truths. So it's maybe not that far of a stretch to say that we had a misunderstanding even of gender equality because of the influences of these pagan traditions. And one thing, so I wrote pagan priests here because the pagan churches, Babylon and Egypt in particular, let alone Greece and Rome, they had their priest system. So they were the intercessor for their gods, the priests. So you only knew the pagan gods through these priests. And the priests were I want to say, it was cultish, but they would dictate what the people would do, how their traditions would be, how work and labor would be, how their social, cultural interactions would be. So if we take the example of these pagan priests, and only men were priests, because women didn't have any part in that, except maybe if we take kind of a compare and contrast parable look at Rome and the Vestal Virgins that were this constant revolving door of women at the service of these pagan priests for a number of sexual, as well as like divinating, divining. They would inject, or if the women would inhale some form of drug and then have these prophetic visions of the gods or something, and then that would inform the priest. Well, so women, we see here a very strong example of how sexuality, women's sexuality, was used specifically for the pleasure of the men, not just any men in this particular analogy comparison, but the priestly men, the ones supposedly closest to God. And this becomes significant later on as Rome and the papal Rome establishes more and more. And we're just now starting to kind of peel back the onion of all the sexual inappropriate advances, behaviors, of pedophilia within the church, not just against women, but also against men, whom in those regards, we know we're seeing, like the men that were abused, we're seeing kind of like how we were taking a look at, now the term just left my mind. Maybe somebody can help remember what that
Pederasty?
Greek term, pederasty, thank you. So early on within these religions, we have I'm going to put example of pederasty, and I might have that misspelled, but this is the dominant submission pattern of men being, older men in particular, being the dominant over other men who were labeled or in the same category as women, subjected, subservient to men, not having any power of their own. So the men in these fundamentally flawed systems have at their core what we will come to know as patriarchy, where there is a gender inequality of a dominant man submissive woman or younger male, which I'll just, hopefully that doesn't confuse anybody, but just establishing this hierarchy of who is in charge and who doesn't have any say whatsoever in the fate of their life, or of course the men, once they got older, the young men, once they got older, then the roles would switch. But as women, would there be any instance where that role would switch for them? So is it easy to see how poor of an influence, how pagan influences seeped into the patriarchal framework of the Christian religion? And not just the Christian religion, but Adventism as well. And we know too, within Egypt, we have not just, you know, this loose association of priests within their different hierarchy of gods, but the Egyptian culture, we also have, as Elder Tess has pointed out, the Apis bull structure. So not only is this a system, the Apis bull like worship system, celebrating the conquering spirit, the male masculine victoriousness, their strength, their fertility, but they're setting up these, so this god, or the Apis bull, I guess God, is being seen as the same as the king or the pharaoh. I guess I should put pharaoh rather than king, but I think, and my spelling today is bad, so that's why I wrote king, because right now pharaoh isn't wanting to come out very well. But when there is this substitution, it's like God by proxy, right? How the Apis bull is seen as a symbol manifested within all the characters of the Apis bull, all the characteristics of the Apis bull manifest within the person of the king, of the pharaoh. And then the people who celebrate that belief system, they all pattern that inequality, that dominating male, and especially with the king, you're looking at classism, because no one else is equal to him, and he can tell all of the people what to do. So in that regard, there's even another level of just discrimination or oppression of men, but not as much, right? The men of the lands aren't on the equal footing as the king. However, the men within their house are to embody almost this Apis bull mentality, this kingly persona that has at its core this inequality, dominant, submissive framework, mindset. And then within this history, we have God telling Moses that he is going to be, that God is going to be to Moses as Moses is going to be to Aaron. So to Aaron, Moses is going to be a god. Jehovah tells Moses this. And so then we have kind of added layers of how that kind of that proxy system is supposed to be established, and then how it's twisted and maligned to create this very oppressive patriarchal system. And does anybody have any questions? Have I lost anybody? So when we see that this written language, that the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Bible, are, it's probably not a stretch to see, at least to me, and if I'm wrong, I'll gladly admit that. If there's something that anybody proves contrary to this, that these influences are written in our scripture. So if we take the scripture as literal, then we're going to have the wrong understanding of things, because we're not taking into account these false influences over the written word, over the plain thus saith the Lord, if you will. And so then we can also see in the Millerite time, when they're dealing with racism, with nationalism, how there's still, so for their time, racism was kind of their test, so to speak, is how we're coming to see it. But do they have these other, do they even recognize? Well, yes, they recognize that the Sabbath is needing to be taken care of, to be restored. But do they see gender equality as anything to be looked at? Maybe. There's definitely, we can see how Ellen White is a radical feminist in her time, just as Jesus was a radical of his time, of probably radical feminist actually of his time, where, and I'm using radical to mean, as Elder Tess has pointed out a few times in other studies, that radical means have a far departure from the traditional norms, right? So we have baptism introduced, which goes against the cultural norms of circumcision. So now women are a part of the kingdom of heaven directly, not by proxy through whom they marry or whom their fathers are. And so when we see in the spirit of prophecy and inspired writings how women in particular are still to called to adhere to their husbands as Christ adheres to the church, or advises is over the church, how women aren't to really make a fuss. They're just to, if there's abuse going on within the house, they are supposed to do something about it. But beyond that, there's really not a whole lot where Ellen White even says that, without stating it so plainly, that a woman's place is kind of in the kitchen, elevating cooking to be a very highly regarded skill or trade for women. Though she does kind of counteract that later, or maybe has an opposing view of it when she sees within her life how she could have accomplished so much more how she was able to accomplish so much more by having other people help her with the household duties, with raising the kids even, because she had a mission from God. And so herself, and especially being a woman prophet, a woman preacher, she's setting herself apart from the other patriarchal, apostate Protestant or Catholic or pagan influences of that day. And so what I meant to show with establishing patriarchy with Adam, with Seth, with Noah, with Abraham, Moses, patriarchy carries through even throughout the 144,000 history, but this is where it's to come to an end, the way that we've understood it before, just as how the influences of Apis bull mentality seeped into Catholicism, seeped into, actually before that, seeped into the Jewish religion, and then the Christian church through Catholicism, through apostate Protestantism, and then Adventism. How we have this false understanding of the nature of the king and the kingdom, which is more or less the Apis bull mentality. So in that regard, this is how idolatry, how I'm setting the story up to reveal how patriarchy, how this this dominant submissive role that men and women have, even the gender roles, men being the warriors, the hunters, the providers, protectors, women being the cookers, the childbirthers, the doers of men's will. And using that as the parable of idolatry, of how we are to look at the Apis bull within our church structures, our church framework, our mindset, as well as within our own homes, within ourselves. So how can we, and hopefully I'll answer the question today of what we can do about solving the problem of patriarchy. Just so that everybody are engaged with this study, I want to ask for each person to give me examples in writings in their lives of what patriarchy means to you. So I'm going to open up the list of participants. If you don't want to be called on, just say, but I'm going to call on people. Carol Pierce, what is patriarchy to you? How do you see it? How do you see it?
I would say domineering.
Okay.
Okay. And taking
As a keep going.
Go ahead.
As a woman, how do you see your role within patriarchy? When you were married, what was your role?
Stayed home and took care of children and did the cooking.
Okay, and now, how do you see your role? Because you're still in a patriarchal society, even though you're not married into that patriarchal relationship, still within that society. So when interacting with others, are you more likely to listen or take a woman seriously versus a man seriously? Is there still any discrepancy that you can see? If you don't, that's okay. That's good.
I don't have an answer to that because I just want to help people in any way that I can. So, if somebody needs help, a man or woman, I would offer my services the best I knew how to do to help them. I don't know how to, whatever is needed, I guess, or if, like I said, do it.
Putting our call to service aside, do you see any like favoritism towards men or towards women? Do you listen more to what men say versus what women say, or
Actually,
has that changed?
I would have to say that since I'm more around women, I listen to women, and and we're kind of like a help to one another. If I don't understand this, then I listen to one of them. But then I have on the other hand, around here where I live.
Okay. Well, Thank you for your honesty and for answering. I'm gonna keep moving. Okay, thank you. David Brown, how do you see patriarchy?
Well, it's something we all were born into, and we never gave a second thought to it. We were, thus saith the Lord people. Even the atheists followed along with this, as you were pointing out, with the Babylonian and Egyptian societies. Male dominance was first and foremost, but you could say that there's a lot of persecution on females because of patriarchy societies. And you know, speaking personally, Kathy and me, we had our roles that we, knew from society. Kathy was a better cook than me. That was no brainer.
Not now.
And but I will say, for my son, I told him one day, I was in there, he had his chores to do during the week, and one of them was like cleaning the bathroom kind of thing. And I went in there and well, let's back up. In high school, I had a job in it was like a maintenance department. I went away to boarding school and, mop floors and polish floors and clean bathrooms and all that stuff. So, I kind of had my handle on that. So I'm in there in the bathroom and I'm in the toilet with my hands in a scrubber and I'm scrubbing down in the bowl, and Kathy comes in and she says to Luke, see, this is how you're supposed to get in there and clean this up, right? But what I'm leading up to is that in patriarchy, and I don't know if this is in every home, but what every single duty there is to do in the house, from laundry to cooking to cleaning the bathrooms, the man should know how to do every single thing. Not anything should be left out. Now, that's probably not patriarchy, because they probably say, well, no, men are supposed to do that. But for me, this is what I felt.
Spectrum.
Okay.
Yeah, keep going. I
just felt that was the job of men, is to be able to step in and do stuff to help the wife. I always liked to do the laundry. It was easy for me. Kathy at first didn't like me doing that, but now I do it all the time. There was just stuff like when we did real diapers for our son. And so we had like a bucket that was full of water or whatever. And so we would dump it in there. And then when the bucket got full, you'd do the laundry, right? And, and I did all that kind of stuff. And part of it was because in a lot of ways, Kathy and I were really equal, because it wasn't like I worked and she didn't work. No, she had her career as an RN. I had my career as a respiratory therapist. And for a while there, we worked opposite days so we could both take care of our son rather than farm him out. So it was, in many ways, it was equal that way. But when you look at the backdrop of the whole thing, I was basically doing the firewood, and then she was basically doing things in the home. So there was things that were a fallback. I mean, Kathy, I'm not saying she's weak, but wood is heavy. Chainsaws are, they're things, and so that's the kind of things I was learning about and ended up doing for 27 years. And so Kathy would do other chores. Yeah, she would help me stack wood, and she could light a fire and, those kinds of things very well, just without me. She didn't need me for that. But you just kind of fall into these things because that's the way it is. I mean, I enjoyed it when she would come out in the woods with me and we would get the wood and stuff like that, because I didn't mind being out there alone, but you're technically not supposed to be in the woods with a chainsaw by yourself. But, I broke all those rules. So
I'm gonna put your comments on hold for a second. Sarah had her hand up. I want to kind of keep moving through more. Thank you, David,
okay,
for
good. You're
your
welcome.
comments. Sarah, did you still have a question or comment? James, I see your hand up too. I'll give Sarah a chance to either say that your question was answered or maybe she's not on anymore. I still see Sarah. Do you still have a question? Just put your hand back up. I'm gonna answer James's question real quick, or his hand up. Go ahead, James.
Can you hear me? I'm on the Bluetooth.
Yes.
Okay. You know, I guess when the patriarchy issue came up, it seemed to be very narrow for me personally. You know, the husband in charge, yada yada. And I've talked on my perspective of it before in my life. But a while back, I don't know, I can't remember if it was a couple months or 6 months or however long ago, it was several months ago, Wendy mentioned something to me about my work and how I always have to be the boss. You know, ever since I was 18, I've strove to be work for myself, and as we've unpeeled patriarchy and all its different aspects, at the time I didn't necessarily agree with her, but as we've studied, not Wendy and I, as the movement is studying more, as I've learned more about patriarchy, as time has moved on in just, you know, those few months, I see how she was correct, because being somebody in charge, you always have somebody under you. You always have submissives under you, or people that you want to be submissive anyway.
Right.
And so it's given me even a different look at how to be a leader, you know, in that position, because it's not necessarily as a leader, but, you know, as a boss, as somebody that's running a company, how to put different things in perspective, and how you go about those that you work with, and those kind of things. So I just wanted to add that, because I hadn't heard that perspective mentioned, you know.
Yeah.
This morning.
Thank you. I appreciate you sharing. I'm gonna Jim McIntyre.
Yes.
Hey there.
Hey.
How would you answer the question of patriarchy in your life?
Well, kind of like David said, I was born into it, and I didn't question it. But I remember, I mean, in the Army, when I was in the Army, I remember in Vietnam, I saw there was a woman paratrooper, Vietnamese paratrooper. And
Okay.
I thought, wow, that's kind of strange, you know? And that was the first time I think my patriarchy was dented. And
Okay.
so then when I was in the fire department in New Mexico, we were hiring women, and there was a big backlash about hiring women. And I didn't really understand the reasoning that these guys had for not accepting women in the fire department. And I remember they showed what do you call that? Anyway, there's a part of the city that does equality and all that kind of stuff. Well, they came and they gave us a video, showed us a video, and it showed us this fire department up in Aleutian Islands in Alaska, and it was all women. It was a Navy fire department, and it was all women. The whole station, that they had 2 stations, I think, and they were all women. And they were dispelling the fact that, you know, we were saying that women haven't got the upper body strength to be a firefighter. Well, what these women did was they dropped the ladders on this truck a little lower,
Okay.
and then they have hydrant wrenches that you turn the fire hydrants on with, and they can be really hard to turn. And they just made those
Okay.
longer so they have more leverage, and
Yep.
it worked out really good. So
Yeah.
today,
That's it. Good. Yeah. Keep going.
so today, I can see the patriarchy in me, you know, but I'm trying to pray about it and ask God to remove it, you know? And it takes a while, but I don't know.
Okay. Thank you. That was an excellent point that you brought up. Thanks for your input. I want to ask Kathy McGraw a question about this males being stronger issue. Because I want to say that you've used a chainsaw before. I know I have. I was thinking that you have as
No.
well.
I've never
Okay.
used it.
But would you say that with the proper tools, that there's little that you can't do that men can do?
Oh, sure. Sure. That's not a problem.
Yeah.
We see now, women astronauts, explorers, captains of ships, all of that. They're really any realm. Just like men can stay home and be the caregivers of the children.
Right.
Not limited in their either.
Thank you for that. So I'll come back to this removed by God point that Jim brought up. I want to get a few more people's input. Hey there, Bob Smith. Can you hear me, Bob? How about Story Walker? If you're able to talk, how would you answer how you've seen patriarchy, how it's affected your life? I don't hear anything from people. I'm going to move on. Susie in Jamaica. Susie Q. Are you able to?
Good morning.
There you are. Good morning. How would you answer this question for yourself of how patriarchy has shaped your life, how it's had a role in it, and maybe how you've overcome it?
I guess growing up, there was 4 girls, 4 boys. I was the last girl.
Okay.
And I know my mother would make the girls do the washing up, the cooking, all those things, tidy the house, while the
Sure.
boys could get to go and play.
Yeah.
So I used to always rebel. Yes, I would clean and everything, but I would go and play football with them, climb trees and, you know, do all the things that they were doing, making stuff with my hands, you know, woodwork or whatever, joining them with what they're doing as well, because I want to do that. And I remember growing up, and my dad was sick. And because he saw my strength in comparison to my sister, he would let me do the massaging of his legs, his arms and things like that, while he would let my sister massage his chest. So he obviously, you know, because he saw my rebellion, gave me the more of the physical heavy duty work as such. But it was very prevalent in the home, you know, the roles. But I never stuck with it. I wanted to do what I wanted to do because what they were doing was more enjoyable.
Thank you for that. Okay. I think that gives us a little bit more insight. If anybody has anything else that they would like to add, we've got a few seconds to let it be known, or we delve into understanding this a little bit deeper, patriarchy, and what we each can do.
Can I
I'd
say
like to share.
something?
Yes, please. I will start with Kathy.
Okay, I know David spoke for both of us, but as far as me personally, I mean, he you know, as far as our family, you know, dynamics were, but as far as me and my home as a child, I didn't have a father in the house. Okay, from first grade on. For a short period, my mother did remarry, and I had a stepfather very briefly, but that's another story. But for all, you know, intents and purposes, there never was a man in our house telling us what to do. It was my mother. And I think I've told this story here before, is that I mean, she went to nursing school, and her parents both had told her she wasn't gonna, they were against it, and basically told her she'd never make it, you know. And it wasn't that my grandmother didn't work. As far as I know, she always worked in the bank, and she became a city treasurer and blah, blah, blah. So I don't know really their relationship and why they felt my mother couldn't do. But thankfully she did, because she ended up divorced with 3 children to raise. And, you know, you got to have a job where you make decent money. Because I can remember my dad writing out a check for $50 every week. That's what he got. That's what he paid, $50. I guess it was alimony, childcare, whatever, but $200 a month. So my mother grew, you know, our home was matriarchal. And I remember her clearly telling me to get a job where I would be able to support myself and not have to depend on a man or another person to take care of me. So that was instilled in me from the beginning, is you need to not depend upon a man, basically with her words, you know, to take care of you. You've got to be able to, you know, take care of yourself. So, you know, we could go on, but basically that was it. Not that it, you know. So I always was pretty much, I didn't care what any guy said. I'm going to do what I want to do, or what I think is right. And I think our relationship, David and I, was pretty well split equal. I'm not saying there wasn't patriarchy sprinkled here and there, in our marriage. But overall, it was an equal deal.
Good.
I guess that's
Thank you.
enough said there. Mhm.
Thank you for sharing your perspective, your point of view. All right, Bob, what would you like to say?
I just wanted to share, looking at everyone's got a different upbringing. Some people, as Kathy's saying, it was more matriarchal. Some had an extreme patriarchal, upbringing. Mine was more neutral in many
Okay.
ways. However,
Mhm.
the point I really want to bring out is that even from the teachings when I became a Seventh-day Adventist and was studying, it was always that the man was the one who's supposed to be like the head of the home and the one who like took care of the family, the one who banded everything together and was the protector. And
Yeah.
and the other point I wanted to bring out is, even if you think that you haven't been really inculcated into patriarchy, you have to realize that the entire planet, all the human beings on this planet have been marinating in it since the very beginning. And so to deny its existence is to not even recognize that it's permeated you. And the only way to get rid of it is to understand it for what it really is, so that you can actually, crush it out and start with a completely different mindset. It has to do with a completely different mindset, because that's the whole part that's wrong with the different streams of feminism, is because they're starting out with one foot on a banana peel, because they're not getting rid of the patriarchy. They're saying, okay, this is what we can do to counteract it. And and so I don't know where you're going with your study, but we're all have been exposed to it, and as like Kathy said, it's sprinkled in there.
Yeah.
It's just there.
Yes. And actually that is where I'm going. I hope you've been reading the Gender Not book that your wife recommended to me, because that's what we're gonna talk about, a couple of those points. Anybody else before we move on? Okay. So we've made our list of some of the points that we've come to recognize patriarchy, the role that it's played in our lives and our society, how these were taken from apical influences throughout our early history, even as we transitioned from a Greek to a Roman modern day Western civilization, how patriarchal influences were so heavy within literature that it went to some great lengths to try and silence women, to show that that was really their role. Women was to not say anything, not to have a voice, not to have any say about society, just to toe the line, do the work that men would tell them to do. Now, I want us to take note of patriarchy being removed by God, because I don't want to pick on you, Jim, because you are not the only one that believes that. And I really want to emphasize how disempowering that is, how ungodly that actually is, because we are called to exercise the will. God cannot do for us the work we are meant to do ourselves. Remember that from Spirit of Prophecy. Now, one of the things that, so this is, I'm going to start talking a little bit about the Gender Not book. I've gotten a lot of good insights. I don't know the author's name off the top of my head, but that should
It's
be
Alan.
Googleable.
Alan.
Ellen Johnson.
Yeah.
Thank you. It's Alan Johnson. S-O-N?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. So a lot of this is taken from chapter 9 from the book. And I chose this chapter because it most succinctly summarized the points that are applicable, the points that are necessary, that we must do in order to make the necessary changes, because they're not going to be done for us. And this has actually kind of been a conditioning that the patriarchal system has allowed for, because the advantage to patriarchy is that it's so prevalent, it's so widespread, as Bob said, worldwide, that it's become invisible. It's so natural now to people that they don't even know that they're assenting to it. They're just living their lives and propagating these patriarchal abuses. And it's not that men are propagating these abuses towards women solely. And abuse doesn't always have to be physical or sexual. A lot of it is emotional or mental. But this is also how women have been conditioned to participate within society, to see their role. If they want to have any active role within society, they must do it within the confines of the patriarchal system. So one of the things that Alan talks about in the Gender Knot is how patriarchy is a legacy. I'm going to take off the list here. So anybody, if you have a question, just raise your hand or say something, okay? I'll try and be cognizant of where I'm writing on the board, or how you guys can see the board. So if we understand patriarchy is a legacy, because it has its origins, I mean, probably pretty early on in our history. We had 2,500 years of world history before the written language, before God's law was written down, before the oral traditions that were passed down for 2,500 years for Moses to write down. Do you think that in those 2,500 years, with two different eras of captivity, how well preserved were these beginnings when there was equality in the garden? When Adam and Eve did the work necessary to restore their relationship to God, we know that they did. And we know that they didn't pass on that relationship with God to their children. It was their children and the generations afterwards to do that work for themselves as well. So we can understand that patriarchy has this long legacy history. And we all share ownership of this history of the legacy. And the dynamic that patriarchy sets up is of control and fear. So patriarchy affects men and women differently. And we know this throughout different classes, through race, through sexual orientation. All of these are different intersections that compound patriarchy in a different way for men and women. And this control and fear that drives patriarchy is inseparable from male privilege. competitive solidarity among men, and it propagates oppressive systems at the expense of women. These are going to be hard-hitting statements. So if I need to repeat anything, say it more clearly, more slowly, I need you to speak up. So in propagating this oppressive system at the expense of women, it's a coercive, the coercive control that influence women, that coerce women to accept the terms of their own oppression, even to the point of resisting change. And for that example, I'll illustrate Phyllis Schlafly as the counter to the women's movement, the ERA, the Equal Rights Amendment movement. She was so opposed to change because to her, patriarchy was the system that God set up for everybody to fall in line with, which makes it easier for the religious right to champion these women who are subservient to the patriarchal system. So it propagates oppressive systems at the expense of women, coercing women to accept the terms of their own oppression, even to the point where women become vocal about resisting change. Without naming patriarchy for what it is, the focus shifts to gender issues, masculinity and femininity, gender roles, normalizing gender discrimination, racism, and violence to women. It personalizes patriarchy, the cycle between guilt and shame that individual men can feel because they feel attacked. They don't see this patriarchal system as a grouping of men rather than just feeling attacked themselves. So this devalues and dismisses feminism and feminists. Men become lost in denial when they personalize patriarchy, start blaming the victim, and make false gender parallels. But what can be done about it? We, men and women, but in this instance, I'm going to emphasize men, need to take responsibility, responding, not reacting. Acting from a clear sense of knowing why things are the way they are. Having a clear sense of what to change. Proactive, not passive. So in taking the initiative, part of responsibility is taking the initiative to be aware of men being aware of going out of the way to pay attention, not waiting to be told to do something or waiting to be told that something is wrong, but paying attention in a way that can be seen for themselves. This is proactive, not passive. It's taking the initiative, asking the questions, delving deep inside, asking why we do the things that we do, seeing the motivators, how not just history influenced the control and the fear, the male privilege of patriarchy, but also our own present day, our own familial influences, church influences, educational influences. So taking the initiative to be aware, going out of the way to pay attention, not waiting to be told that something's wrong, but paying attention in a way that we can see it for ourselves, that men can see it for themselves. Doing whatever it takes to have your own analysis, your own insights, not waiting for God to magically change you. This means reading, watching, listening, learning to question assumptions, to have an ongoing commitment to see what we are all participating in and the consequences that it produces. The key step for men wanting to participate in change. This is a really big button for me right now, because one of my friends said recently, how can things change? How things don't seem to look any different. So it doesn't appear that there's change. When will there be change? Well, the change occurs when we change. When we delve deep into this understanding, to reading, to watching, to listening to women, listening and believing them when they say that there are things that they're experiencing, whether by your actions or just by the patriarchal society in general, and believing them rather than dismissing what they've said. So the key steps for men wanting to participate in change, to connect their inner lives to the outer reality of patriarchy. Men are going to have to learn to take responsibility for this social system that bears their name. So while patriarchy is a legacy that both men and women are a part of, and while matriarchy is kind of the counterpart to patriarchy, within that patriarchal system, the matriarch does not buck the system. She works within the patriarchal system, reinforces the patriarchal system. Ultimately, we look back at who was the sinner in Eden. Who was that sinner? So many presentations I've heard people say, and I think it's just ingrained, and this is part of this self-inquiry that we must all do to try and find what influences, what assumptions that need to be questioned. But for so long, inside and outside the Adventist Church, the first sin being attributed to Eve. But is that actually true? We like to think that it is. But if we remember Brendan Bennett's presentation, he did it twice, one for the Repairers of the Breach, the Sacramento Fellowship Group, as well as the Midnight Watch in Australia, where he diagrammed it out and showed very explicitly that the person being dominated is not the man. The man has his foot on the neck of the woman. That it's Eve's fault. And he illustrated also that the sin wasn't necessarily just from eating the apple and, I guess, influencing Adam to eat it as well. It wasn't Eve's fault for the gender inequality sin to permeate through history as much as it was Adam's sin or man's sin of standing over women and saying, you did this, you stay down on the ground. I'm going to tell you what to do. I'm going to abuse you however I see fit because you did this. That sinner is the man. The one who's saying, who's overlording over any person, whether it's a homosexual man who's being stood over by a heteronormative man, saying, you're a sinner, you're wrong. It's the man who is doing that that's wrong. Penny, would you mind reading what you just wrote?
Sure, hold on.
I think you're onto something, but I'm not sure if I read it fully. Okay, I've got it. Eve was, oops, where'd it go? Eve was beguiled while Adam willfully sinned. However, he never looked at her the same way and felt that she no longer could be trusted. That's a powerful point. Thank you, Penny. Do we all see that? Is this something foreign to anybody? Raise your hand or say, I don't understand. Okay.
Understand.
So if we, oops, yes, go ahead.
I just said I didn't understand.
Okay. About the man being the sinner while standing over the woman?
Yes.
Or, okay, of the sin not being the woman's responsibility solely,
Yeah.
and the man's job to punish her. So how Brendan diagrammed it out, I'm just drawing this even worse. So he drew 3 examples of, the first one was Eve on the ground and Adam standing over her, standing on her. The second one being, oh goodness, I might not have this one fully understood. So it was, I don't remember exactly how she, or how he rather described the worship, but it was,
Cain
go
over
ahead.
Abel. Cain on the neck of Abel, the murder.
Cain on the neck of Abel. Thank you. I couldn't remember who was the,
Yeah.
right. So Cain saying to Abel, I'm going to show you, I'm going to do this my way. You're in my way, and you need to go. And then the third sin of it actually being Ham's brothers who treated Ham differently after he did the thing that nobody talks about to his father, to Noah. Ham and Japheth treat Ham differently after that. And while Ham did wrong, it was the different treatment afterwards that was the point of sin. So the same goes with Adam seeing Eve differently after that point of sin, of saying, well, you did this, I'm blaming you for enticing me, for telling me to eat this, and I'm going to treat you differently from here on out. That was the sin. Does that make more sense, Carol?
It does. Well, wait a minute, I don't know if it does or not. Yes, it
Can
does.
I,
Thank you.
okay, you're
Yeah,
welcome.
thank you.
Thank you for asking, so that can be clarified.
I have a comment.
Yes, Sue Ellen, go ahead.
Well, that kind of reminds me of that scenario of, forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. And also that story about when the king forgave the debt of the rich man, but then the rich man wouldn't forgive the debt of his servant. And then the king says, well, you don't deserve to be forgiven if you're not going to forgive that guy.
Right. Thank you. Those are very, very good parables to apply. Anybody else have a comment or question? Trying to read Richard. I'm not sure I understand your point, Richard.
Sorry, that was a reply. I was saying hello to someone and they said hello back. They just said they were lonely. So I just was saying a reply back. I apologize by sending that to everyone.
Oh, okay. I've got to. That's okay. Thank you for clarifying.
My bad. I was just saying hello back. Sorry, everybody.
I just wanted to say something, and I don't know if I'll get myself in trouble for it, but the Bible says, as Penny wrote, Eve was beguiled. Okay, so she was deceived. And the Bible also tells us that Adam was the one who sinned. So I can't give you the, place where it says it, but God attributes the sin to Adam and not to Eve. The Bible says that. Now, again, I don't want to get in trouble saying, thus saith the Lord, but it's always been clear to me in that sense that it was Adam's fault. Adam was the one being, who was the sin was attributed to, and not Eve. So she was the one who ate of the fruit. She had, God granted her a different measure of grace than we understand by not saying it's your fault. Even though you left your husband's side, even though all this stuff, you were tricked and you're not going to be held responsible. But Adam made a deliberate choice, and that's the whole point of sin and all this stuff we're talking about, equality. It's a matter of choice, and it was Adam who made the choice to eat the fruit. Therefore, he's the one who is sin is attributed to. If that makes any sense.
It does, but do you see how the accepted assumptions, I mean, even how people talk about it. I can't remember what presentation I listened to this past week where the woman doing the presentation kept saying, the sin of Eve. And in Catholicism, in apostate Protestantism, who do they attribute to the sin? Do they say that it's Adam? I don't think they do. It's
I don't know. I
the
wouldn't know, but I don't think they do either, because all they see is Genesis, and they don't see the Bible as a whole, and they don't see the whole picture and understand. Yeah, but I get what you're saying. It's the whole patriarchal
Right. It's the
That-
attribution.
This,
It's reading wrong.
Yeah.
Is kind of even
Right,
so when you
right.
point out that scripture, the thus saith the Lord, does say Adam, and I think spirit of prophecy is the second witness to that as well, that how has the patriarchal I mean, so the sin rests on Adam, who disobeyed God, so did Eve, but Adam then becomes this dominant to Eve's submissive. Oh, thank you. Oh my goodness, it's that late.
I mean, sorry, 10. 10:52.
Whew. Okay. I know I would probably go a little bit later, but it scared me by thinking I was an hour over.
No, you're not. See.
Okay. So when we have a proper reading of the inspired word, and yet we see the influences that the Babylonian, the Egyptian, the Greco-Roman captivities have flipped that around. And the influence that all of this history provided for the first sin was blaming the woman. And so this is part of how it's so important to understand how we read, how to apply parables, how to, if we're not reading correctly, then this is how we have a false understanding of it being woman's fault. Woman needs to shut up, let men do the things that they need to do, because, well, I mean, even later in the Bible, it talks about that. So this is where I'm trying to emphasize that the written word was so heavily influenced by these pagan priests, rituals, principles, understanding of patriarchy, how that changed our understanding of Eve's role in the sin. Because we as women are still being punished for this today in kind of the collective consciousness of the world's that the world being in this patriarchal framework. Women are not included as men are. Men are held to the higher standard because it's woman's fault for Adam's sin. And so that's where I was going with that. Does that make sense to everybody? Does anyone have another question?
I just have a thought I'd like to share.
Yes. Yeah, go ahead.
When you look at the situation there, we if you look at it correctly, I believe that just as patriarchy is wrong, we understand that if everything was matriarchal, it would be wrong because it's one over the other. It defies equality. And so when you look at the sin, I know because patriarchy is what we're discussing here, and it's easy to look at the sin and say, okay, it's Adam, the one who sinned, and yes, it's true, Eve was beguiled, but the reality of it is Eve had a choice too, and she had a choice to listen to the serpent or to listen to what God had warned her on. So she sinned and Adam sinned. They both sinned. And but it was in just different ways
today.
Pardon?
Yeah, but who's being punished for that?
I understand
in the societal framework.
I understand that, and I'm 100% behind that. It's the women who are being punished for it at this point. But I'm just in our own little conversation we're having here on this chat to sit there and say, well, Adam's the one who sinned and Eve didn't, is to deny the fact. Then that's putting it all on the man and not on the woman. They both equally sinned, but the way society looks at it and the way everyone looks at it is that Eve's the one who did it, and so she's getting the blame when it's not just Eve, it was him, and even him more so, because she was beguiled. And so it's like trying to sit there and say, to grade the different levels of sin. Sin is sin, but not that they're all exactly the same. But you know what I'm saying? That's my only point. But I agree with you. I agree with you that it has to do with how women have been terribly, terribly oppressed to the point where they've accepted it and have been going along with it, even when because they can't even see a way out. It's like they can't fight City Hall, as I heard Penny telling me once.
So I want to draw your attention to something that I hear quite often from men, that even women too, that I'm close with, will often say, "Stop blaming the men," and that's kind of a slippery slope, because so that's part of this task of looking at patriarchy as a system, while at the same time it's a collection of individuals. We're not talking about one individual person getting the blame for all of this. It is necessary for men to take responsibility in this, because
I agree.
for so long they haven't. And for people to ask, men in particular, to ask, nothing's going to change. I'm looking at the progression of the movement, and I don't see any change while still putting, like, okay, women, show me what you're going to do different. That's not the right attitude to have. And I think I was kind of the hyperbolic response, because I've not interacted with anybody who's taken that stance, but still having an understanding of the need to take responsibility. Women have been taking responsibility, at least since, first wave in the late 19th century, and the second wave in the 20th century, third wave now. We as a people have to recognize our responsibility within that system. It is not woman's job to do anything for men to help them understand this, because now that's shifting the responsibility onto women again. So I'm just going to kind of point out that slippery slope of the kind of a red herring. It's kind of a distractor of stop blaming the men, because blame and shame have nothing to do with what this presentation aims for. If anybody has taken anything personally or feels shame or blame, then I see that as a reaction that something inside you might actually need to be looked at, rather than something that actually came from me. Because it's important to take responsibility, to respond rather than to react, to respond in a way that says, okay, I need to look at my behavior. I need to look at my way of thinking about my role as a man and how I interact with women. I need to be a part of the solution, not self-absorbed and increasingly entrenched as a part of the problem. So I'm going to keep going. I'm almost done. But if anybody else has something to add or question, please interrupt me. So there are these key steps for men wanting to participate in change, to connect the inner lives to the outer reality of patriarchy. Men are going to have to learn to take responsibility for the social system that bears their name, to go beyond this being a social problem, understanding how social systems work, how the dominant submissive role works throughout society, how our participation makes that happen, how our participation in the submissive dominant power struggle is a self-reinforcing cycle that stops change from happening. To be a part of the solution, so those wanting to participate in change must be a part of the solution, not self-absorbed or increasingly entrenching themselves as part of the problem. Men have to take responsibility for patriarchy. Join the feminist women in taking responsibility for this patriarchal legacy. Until men share seriously in emotional, intellectual, practical aspects of struggling with this legacy, change is limited. Men and women continue feeling and being at odds with one another. Like all dominant groups, men are stuck in arrested development, wrapped in a childlike obliviousness, grandiosity, and sense of entitlement in relationship to the women. This insulates the men from the adult responsibility of being aware of what's happening, of doing something about it. And this responsibility includes coming to terms with reality of privileges and oppression that supports it. The reality of life under patriarchy has forced many women to change in order to survive, to work for something better for us all. And we demand nothing less from the men.
Richard has his hand.
Okay, thank you for letting me know. Go ahead, Richard. I don't know if you're muted. I can't hear you. It doesn't look like you are, but I can't hear anything.
Is that better?
Yes.
Okay.
Me now.
Okay. Yeah, I was talking through my Bluetooth headphones. So this isn't a perfect parallel, but on the surface, it is. But there's an interesting thing going on right now with the NFL. The National Football League is being sued by a black head coach, and the NFL, it's owned by it's like about 30 teams or 32 teams, and they're all white owners, right? And so this one of the black head coaches, he was recently fired and turned down for a job, and he's suing the NFL for unfair hiring practices. And the main force of this suit is the racial side of it. So he's saying they're racist practices. So anyway, the parallel that I'm seeing to what you just said, Alyssa, was that what people are doing is that they're asking the black players. Now the NFL is 70% black, right? So the players are, but when it comes to positions of management and coaching and things like that, the percentages, they flip. So that would be like the NHL, the National Hockey League, with it being 70% white, if you could imagine most of the coaches and owners being black. if you could imagine that flip side. So anyway, what the parallel that I'm seeing with what you just said is the owners and the media and all that, they're asking Black people, what do the white people need to do to change? And rather than the people that's in power relinquishing that power and asking themselves what they need to do, they're putting all of the onus on the Black people to state what the problems is, rather than looking internally and seeing what the problems is. So on that level, I saw a parallel to what you were just saying.
Thank you for that. I think that's a good analogy. David, I saw that you had typed something. Do you want to read that?
Yeah, that was a paragraph that I had looked at earlier. And there's so many subjects in this paragraph that are just, all about our, because I had originally found this as a paragraph that talked about equality of Adam and Eve. And do you want me to read the paragraph?
You can paraphrase.
Okay. Yeah, well, okay, so in the very beginning, it says there, in the creation, God had made her equal with Adam. So we see that was the original plan. But what I was looking at just now when we were talking about, okay, who sinned, right? Whose fault is it? We know it's both their faults. But the result, or what happened, was the next sentence. It says, had they remained obedient. They both were disobedient. And then going down to the very bottom of it, I mean, there's so much to discuss on this. We could take the whole time on this, but it says the last, let's say, sentence of the whole thing. It's kind of long, but I guess I'll just read it, but it's really the last half of the last sentence. Had the principles enjoined in the law of God been cherished by the fallen race, this sentence, though growing out of the results of sin, would have proved a blessing to them. And this is what I want to look at here is, but man's abuse of the supremacy. Who's abusing here? I think this is what Brendan's saying. You can't have slaves without having slave owners. So they're the abusers. Adam is the one that's abusing Eve, basically, in a generic way, let's just say. So, but man's abuse of the supremacy thus given to him too often, what? Renders the lot of woman very bitter and made her life a burden. So you can just see how sin just tumbles down there. And yeah, we did see that it was both of their problems. They were both disobedient. But I really fixed in my mind, if I have it fixed in my mind right, you can't have slaves being abused unless you have someone on top of their neck. And so that's where we see Adam on top of Eve's neck. We see Shem and Japheth on top of Ham's neck, and so on and so forth. And that's sort of what I was aiming at, I guess.
Okay, thank you for sharing that. And that was Adventist Home 115.1.
Yeah.
You, there was something that you triggered. Okay, so I think this blame game of saying, well, it's both their faults. While that's true, that can oftentimes be for the man who doesn't want to look at himself, can be that that red herring of, okay, well, the woman needs to take responsibility for, it's this this oppressive cycle over again. So kind of how Richard was saying, the white coaches asking, okay, black coaches or black players, what can we do differently? This is what Alan in the Gender Knot was also pointing out. It's not it's not women's responsibility to tell the men how to change. The men have to take initiative to be aware, going out of the way to pay attention, not waiting to be told that something's wrong, but paying attention in a way that we can see, that men can see the problem for themselves. And women have been seeing this oppression is a constant reminder of the problem. And for men to, and I don't think you're saying this, but I think the temptation is there for men to say, okay, well, I'm just going to go back to the beginning of, you know, Eve has a responsibility too, so I don't have to do anything until, you know, Eve sorts herself out. That's a false equivalency. David, was there anything else that you wanted to add before? I kind of took over. I didn't mean to.
No.
If there was something else that you
No. No, that's good. This has been a very good subject, and I'm sorry that we have to have time constraints on these kind of things, because they really, I think, are bringing you know, truths and things out. It's good.
Yeah.
So thanks.
And good, thank you. And I warned you at the beginning that these weren't going to be nice things, that some hopefully will make you, each of us, a little uncomfortable, the men in particular, to really search within themselves, see how this patriarchal system that men in particular have been raised in, this male the male male privilege, how it really exists, how women are not afforded the same opportunities as the men have been. And I think in more of the younger generations, I think that's starting to change, but it's also starting to get unhealthy with this competitiveness, where the men are seeing that the women are, you know, an enemy in a different way because they're taking jobs away. And in that sense, then we need to see that the patriarchal system, through the industrialized society, how that contributes. So to see how societal systems work and to see our role, our responsibility in them. The reality of life under patriarchy has forced many women to change in order to survive, to work for something better for us all. We don't expect anything less from the men. So this is all that we're asking. And Sarah, I saw that you made a comment. Men don't accept responsibility for their abuses, but blame women because what Eve did. They justify abuse by who sinned first and brought about the suffering. I think that can be true in a lot of instances. And this is where I'm not blaming the men here. I'm not saying that they're doing that currently. I am urging you to look within, to truly take an honest look, take the initiative, take the responsibility, because this patriarchal system has men woven into its fabric.
Lana has her hand up.
Oh, Lana, thank you for letting me know, Pam. Go ahead, Lana.
Thank you for this presentation. I just I have a thought came to me right now, and this is about this quote where Eve had been the first in transgression, and she had fallen into temptation by separating from her companion, contrary to the divine direction. It's interesting that how in my mind, when I read this passage and when I read the story in Genesis, because there's only two people, there's man and a woman. and the woman is the one who takes the forbidden fruit, right? We are, when I read this Ellen White's quote about that they were instructed, they were instructed to stay together, right? I personally, I was thinking, well, then that looks like submission. So a woman was instructed to follow her husband. But if you look at it carefully, Adam could have separated from his companion too, and he also could have ended up near to that forbidden tree. And what I'm trying to say is that this instruction wasn't about a woman following a man, but rather it's like a church. It's like a church in the world, right? The reason why, one of the many reasons why God creates the church is so that people can come together, and there's strength in numbers, where people, like-minded people that were instructed in a certain way, can support each other on the right path. So Eve separating from Adam wasn't a woman separating from a man that is directing her and guiding her, but rather in dispersed by ourselves, we have less power and we're more gullible. So what I'm trying to say is that when I reread this passage, it seems to me that it could quite possibly be that their union, the strength was in being together rather than separate, not necessarily woman being guided by her husband, because if he would have separated from her, he too could have ended up in the same situation. So if this could be true, then what I'm trying to say is that even so that she was beguiled by the snake, she was beguiled not because of her, that she was created that way, that she was more gullible. She was smart enough, equally as smart and equally as gifted as Adam, but rather it could have been anybody else. It could have been Adam too, but their strength laid in being together rather than separate. Not in a way that I or many times people were propagating this idea in the church and throughout my life that Eve walked away from Adam and then she ended up in trouble because she walked away from Adam. But that's not the case. The case is that a group that was supposed to be together now got separated, and when they're separated, they're more likely to be susceptible to to the things that they shouldn't be doing.
Thank you for commenting.
James has his hand.
Yes, go ahead.
So I really appreciate Lana's point of Adam or Eve could have walked away. But as me personally, as I've looked at this story of Eden, and that's always been brought up by conservative pastors I know about, Eve was told not to wander off, right? And she disobeyed. But one of my favorite Spirit of Prophecy quotes is the greatest evidence, in my paraphrase, it's not verbatim, greatest evidence of God's love is he sends us messages of warning, right? And knowing the story from our side of it, not their side, but since it happened, looking back, Eve was the one that was going to walk away. God just shared with her, you don't want to separate from Adam's side, or something's going to happen, And we look at it as she was given a directive, the conservative group, that you're supposed to stay by Adam's side. You're supposed to stay by the man's side because he's going to protect you. Whereas it was just God saying, and he didn't say it this way, obviously, but you're going to wander off. If you stay by Adam, you know, this bad thing won't happen. Whereas, like Lana said, it could very easily been Adam that was going to be the one that was going to walk away. It's not that he couldn't have, or that it was impossible for him to sin. But anyway.
Mhm. Thank you, James. I think that was a good point that Lana made also. Anybody has, I'm not sure if anybody else has hands up, or I guess the thing that I want to leave all of you with is, especially the men, regardless of how fair you think that you've treated women, or how unfairly you felt like you've been treated, I really want you to look within, to have an honest look at how you've participated in this patriarchal mindset. I think we can get lost in debating, you know, the sin itself. I don't want us to do that, because we need to see our role in fixing this. Not, I mean, yes, and understanding it, but hopefully I've also put the idea in place that our understanding of the sin is just so fraught with false ideology, which has created this this form and the spirit of idolatry, of seeing this patriarchal system as this false God by proxy, this way of looking at men, looking at priests, looking at fathers as the person to be subservient to. That is not what we're being called to do. The form and the spirit of our worship is to love one another as God has loved us, and to be obedient to God by doing so. And in loving one another, it means getting rid of this control and this fear that has just pervaded our society, our relationships. It's really important, if you have any of this in your past, it's really important that you get clear on rooting that out, of seeing the harm that's been done, seeing how the women in your lives have changed. They've had to change in order to survive, because we've had no power to try and overcome this patriarchal system within the patriarchal system. We've had to totally upend that system. I think now I'm 2 hours in. If anybody else has questions, feel free to grab me on the Lambert chat, but I am going to close this for today. If you'll join me in prayer. Loving Creator, we are so humbled by your examples within Scripture of how we've allowed false ideology, a false mindset to affect our behaviors, our thoughts, our treatment of other people, the treatment of ourselves. I ask, Lord, that you impress upon the mind and the heart of every person listening, God, before you now, to ignite their desire to look inward, to see what steps that need to be taken, to know that they are fully capable of making these analysis, these introspection, the necessary introspection towards change. That change won't come unless they do something on its behalf. And I pray, Lord, that you give each of us strength to make that decision every moment, every day. So we leave behind this mentality, this mindset of domination and submission, of lording over another, of desiring another person to think or to do or to say what we want them to. Truly understand what it means to be in communion with you and communion with your church. Be one body made of many parts. You sent us your Son as this divine example. In his name, I pray that we live up to that example. In his name, I pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much. That was a great study.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Yeah.
everyone.
Thank you all for participating.
Yes. Amen.
Thank you for the study. Wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Carol. Thank you, Troy. Thank you, Anna.
Thank you, Alyssa.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Excellent
Jen.
study. Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Thank
Alyssa,
you,
for the
Penny.
study.
Thank you so much. Oh, Lily, thank you. You all have a blessed Sabbath. And thank you, Erin. Well, if you have any questions, just holler.
Mhm.
Love you all.
Amen. Thank
Thank
you.
you,
Love
Penny.
you.
Love you.
Bye.
Happy
Love
Sabbath.
you.
Happy Sabbath.
Happy
God
Sabbath.
Bye.
bless. Bye.
Bye.
Happy Sabbath.
Happy Sabbath.
Happy Sabbath.